Hi, thank you. Yes, I'm going to talk about two things today. So we're right at the beginning of our sort of transformation journey, and we're sort of exploring several things. So I'm going to talk about two things. One is about trees. But before we come on to that, I'm just going to talk about a few things we've done, sort of messing around with AI tools. So if you want to go to the next slide and then the one after. So the first thing that we've trialed doing is using Copilot to redact documents. So we get planning applications which have lots and lots of public interest in Croydon. All of the objections go on our all of the objectives, sorry, go on our website, but we don't put the objections on the website like a lot of boroughs because a lot of them contain sensitive data, and we've got GDPR issues, etc. So we've looked at a sort of typical application. We've got a large application that's got 1,100 objections. Someone's done the FOI, said, can we see all these objections, please? So that means that we have to manually go through those and redact them. So this application we looked at had took 6 hours of office time. We put a sort of fake version of it through Copilot because we didn't want to be putting real data through. And we found it would take about 30 minutes for the AI model to do everything, and for someone to then go through and have a quick skim through and just check whether it's actually got it right or not. So there are some risks with doing things this way. I think firstly the AI models needed a bit of sort of warming up and very clear instructions. And then the second thing that we found, which I'll show you, is that we found that they're slightly over redacting sometimes or getting things wrong. So if people are asking actually for transparency, they're then coming back to us and saying, hang on, why have you redacted all of this information? What are you hiding from us? So we're having to balance that sort of being transparent and giving people the information with not being able to release sensitive information. We've put this through several times, and we've had to really refine the questions that we're asking, because otherwise the redactions are not great. So we've had to say exactly what it is. So this document contains consultation responses. We've used ICO Information Commissioner Office standards, which are the GDPR standards, which identify personal and sensitive data. We've then also had to include any data which identifies where someone lives, because it wasn't redacting that information, and any information about protected characteristics, because it wasn't doing that. We also found a couple of instances where actually it was removing the data or just editing, and obviously what we want from this is redacted data, not edited data. We want the actual data to come through. So we've had to be very clear that we want it to be redacted. So if you go to the next slide, this is what it's pulled out. So it's actually those yellow things I highlighted. It's removed the racist comment, it's removed the address, the kids' names and the schools, but it's also removed all the street names. So this is the best. We've tried several different ways of doing this. We've also tried several different models. We've tried Claude, we've tried ChatGPT, and we've tried Copilot. So we're sort of getting there, but this definitely isn't ready for us to do anything with. And I think what we're realizing is really this needs some sort of customized app rather than just putting this through a language model, which is probably a slightly bigger piece of work. So next slide. So our takeaways from this are that we've trialed something, it needs further testing. I think our view is that we probably need a proper setup rather than having to type in loads of questions and refine things every time we're doing it, because that just increases the scope for error. We have found that actually the results that we're getting are probably accurate for GDPR purposes, so we're not likely to release something by accident and get a £17.5 million fine. But if people are asking for information about a development and people are saying, I don't like this elevation, they sort of want to know, well, which elevation are they talking about? So it's not ready for us to actually sort of put it into practice. Next slide. So we've also trialed a few other things using this. So we've written job adverts. We've tried doing draft responses to complaints, where we've got very, very long complaints. Sometimes we get sort of 20-30 page long complaints, so actually just being able to distill those sort of cuts corners for us. Mailing lists, where we've been unable to use mail merges, and also Excel formulas is really useful when you're trying to do data analysis, look at officer caseloads, that sort of thing. But the other thing is that we're also quite conscious that we've been sort of doing some ad hoc testing with not real data, and that we need some proper governance in place to be able to do this. So we've been talking to our digital services team, and I think we're probably going to pause until we've got some proper governance in place. So the next thing is similar to what Ella and Ben have just talked about. So TPO data. So next slide, please. So we've actually got over 2,000 TPOs in Croydon, some of which date from the 1960s. None of them were digital. They're all on paper, and a lot of those, because they've been maybe made in the 60s, 70s, 80s, some of those trees will be 40, 50 years old. They might not exist anymore. So we can't just be digitizing the sort of the drawings that we've got from 50 years ago. We need to actually make sure the data we're producing is accurate. So next slide. So we've got some TPOs which are sort of groups and woodland orders where actually we need to go out and survey the trees and work out which ones are of value and which ones aren't. Next slide. And then we've got some where we've got a mix of trees and groups and all sorts of things. So I'm going to focus on this one where you can see on the plan there are three TPOs, T1, T2, T3, and then there's a group on this sort of little green. So next slide, this is what it looks like. So we can see those sort of three trees are there, and then there's also something to the north of it. And what we're using is a tool called View City, which is a mapping software. I think that they're in 26 cities now. A lot of you may have used them for things like verified views. We use them for our tall building study, and we've used them for reviewing planning applications for tall buildings. They've mapped London and several other cities to an accuracy of 15 centimeters. And one thing they've also included is trees, which is really useful for us. So next slide, this is how the trees come out in View City. So we can see actually, rather than having that aerial photo, we can actually see there are three trees to the bottom of the screen, and then there are sort of 3 or 4 to the north of that in that green. And they've actually gone out with scanners and actually mapped all of these, so we know that they're accurate. Next slide. You can also helpfully take the leaves off the trees. They've estimated they've measured the heights of the trees, and they've put in these sort of sticks. That's what they've measured, and then they just added the leaves as a graphic. And then next slide. So they've actually got all of these geolocated. So what we're trying to do is to go back to that TPO that we had, where we know there are 3 trees. We can actually take their data, and we are confident that they went out and scanned all of these in 2021. These are accurate enough to 15 centimeters. And we can actually say, okay, these 3 trees, we know exactly where they are. We can now plot them on a map without having to go out and measure them. So there will be some that are less accurate than this, or there will be some sort of woodland orders where actually the data's not there. There will also be some, so when we looked at the plan here, we had 3 TPOs and then a group. When we look on View City, we can see, okay, there are 3 trees here in the right locations, and then there's a group to the north of them. That makes sense. There will also be somewhere we look at the TPO on paper and we compare it to what's on View City, and we say, oh, that's not right. But what we're really hoping to do is not to have to go out and measure 2,000 TPOs again, but actually see how many of those we can get through this system, how many we can map to a degree of accuracy that we're comfortable with, and then how many of those we then need to go out and check and do manually. But we're hoping that will be a much smaller number. Obviously, we're nowhere near, I think it was 130 that Barking Dagenham have got. So obviously we would love to have that number coming from 2000. So next slide. We're obviously at the beginning of this. We have actually scanned all of our TPOs, so they're no longer in a cupboard. They're now in a computer. They've all got files. They're all in iDocs. They've all got references, but they're not accurately plotted, and there's no CAD files. And then the steps that we've identified next is we need to then go through and review all of these using the CAD files from View City. We need to work out which ones are sort of more recent, which ones we know are accurate. If we've made them in the last 3 years, we know we don't really need to check those. Older TPOs will go through using View City and other data. I'm really interested in speaking to Ella about Blue Sky and seeing if there's something else that we can do there to sort of combine the two or sort of add value to the process. And then obviously we will have to then go out. Our tree officers will have to go out and visit them, but it'll be a smaller number. And we're hoping that this is going to make a mammoth manual task into something that we can actually do within the budget. Thanks.
Brilliant, thank you, Jan. It's really interesting. Thanks for sharing. Has anyone got any questions for Jan? We've got one through on the chat. Nat, did you want to talk through that one?
Do we add the TPO into iDocs manually, or is there a batch upload tool available? I have no idea. I can check with my colleagues and get back to you. I don't actually know how we did that.
Great, thanks. And then we've got one from Ben as well. We reduced a 30-day survey program that required site visits to one-day GIS desk study. This provided an estimating saving of £9,600, and that was a response to your question, Steve, in the chat.